One leading socialist was Eugene V. Debs, who was a railroad industry organizer. He was a charismatic figure. He was a perennial political candidate, ran for president of the United States several times as well. There were African Americans who would join the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party came out of an amalgamation of the Social Democrats, the Socialist Labor Party, and other organizations. Was formed in 1901. And even though it was formed as an alliance or a coalition, there was still a lot of internal divisions and factionalism within the Socialist Party that was formed in 1901. You had African Americans who would join the Socialist Party after its formation. People such as Reverend George Washington Woodbey, who was a minister, was born in 1854 during slavery in Tennessee on a plantation, became one of the leading proponents of socialism in the United States during the early part of the 20th century. W.B. Du Bois, for a short period of time, had joined the Socialist Party in the early part of the 20th century. Chandler Owens was another person who had joined the Socialist Party. A. Philip Randolph, a trade union organizer, also had been a member of the Socialist Party. W.A. Domingo was also a member of the Socialist Party. Eugene V. Debs, in an article in the International Social Review published in November of 1903, the article was entitled "The Negro in the Class Struggle." And he said, he talked about an incident where he was traveling in Texas and he got off a train and there was some white men sitting around the train station and they told him, no, don't pick up your bag, let these blacks pick it up, that's their lot in life. And he wrote in response to this, he said, one glance was sufficient to satisfy me that they represented all there is of justification of the implacable hatred of the Negro race. They were ignorant, speaking about the white men, lazy, unclean, totally devoid of ambition themselves, the foul product of the capitalist system and held in the lowest contempt by the master class, yet esteeming themselves immeasurably above the cleanest, most intelligent, and self-respecting Negro, having by reflex, quote, the nigger, unquote, hatred of their masters, unquote. Debs went on to proclaim that, quote, the whole world is under obligation to the Negro, and that the white heel is still upon the black neck is simply proof that the world is not yet civilized. The history of the Negro in the United States is a history of crime without parallel, unquote. And that's what Eugene V. Debs wrote in 1903. So even within the socialist movement itself, there was an ideological struggle over the African American question. Now, beginning in 1919, I talked about the formation of the African Blood Brotherhood. Then, of course, with the Russian Revolution of 1917, this brought about a split within the Socialist Party in the United States. There was a left-wing faction of the Socialist Party which was expelled. Various factions of the socialist movement sought recognition by the Communist International. It was formed in 1919. And what the Communist International did, Lenin ordered, at least two of these factions to unite. They said, well, you have to unite first, then perhaps we'll recognize you. Well, during this period, they also put greater emphasis on them working among African American people. And this is what took place during the 1920s. Of course, there was problems in regard to this. In the United States, they developed the theory of American exceptionalism, which was advanced by leading communists like J. Lovestone, who felt that despite the fact that there was an economic crisis brewing worldwide, that it did not necessarily apply to the situation in the United States, and that the African American people would opt for integration and not self-determination or separation. Now, this wasn't based on any type of scientific research or study. This was something that he felt would garner more support among the working class in the United States. Now, prior to 1928, very few African Americans had attended the Communist International Congresses. Otto Hugheswood, who had been associated with the ABB, attended the Fourth Congress in 1922, along with Jamaican-born poet Claude McKay. Even though the Sixth Congress had developed the Black Belt thesis and urged greater work among the African American community, the right forces inside the CP advocated the notion of American exceptionalism, which implied that the economic conditions of the United States was different than what prevailed in the European capitalist states. The rightist forces within the CP refused to fully implement the thesis adopted at the Sixth Congress of the Communist International. By 1929, another major split developed inside the communist movement. The followers of J. Lovestone, the majority faction, were expelled along with some members of a minority faction that included James P. Cannon and Max Chapman, who went on to form the Trotskyist movement in the United States. Now, later on, during the 1930s, the economic conditions in the United States worsened. But at the same time, the left in this country attempted to do more organizing among the African American people. They formed what was called the American Negro Labor Congress in 1925. In 1930, the Communist Party initiated unemployed councils, which sought to develop a political program to fight the economic crisis. The unemployed councils fought evictions and demanded jobs and relief to the burgeoning masses of poor workers. When Roosevelt was elected in 1932, he rode on the mass discontent of millions of workers in the United States. Other issues would win thousands of African Americans over to the Communist Party and its mass work during the 1930s. For example, the Scottsboro case in Alabama, which Kevin talked about. Prior to the Scottsboro case, the League of Struggle for Negro Rights was initiated by the Communist Party to fight against lynchings and race terror, which escalated during the Depression years. However, with the rise of fascism in Germany in 1933 and the subsequent threats against the Soviet Union by fascism, the Communist International placed greater emphasis on the need to defend the USSR against these threats. In the United States, the National Negro Congress was formed. It was a broad-based popular front against the Depression and for the realization of greater reforms. The general strikes and labor unrest of 1934 in San Francisco and Minneapolis and areas throughout the South led to the formation of the Congress of Industrial Organizations in 1935. The CIO had communists within its leadership ranks and, in principle, called for the organization of African American workers on an equal basis. Other significant developments during the 1930s included the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in 1935 and the Spanish Civil War beginning in 1937. African Americans played a significant role in mobilizing support for the Ethiopians against Italian fascism and imperialism. Also, African American communists such as Harry Haywood fought in Spain on the side of the anti-fascist forces. When the United States entered the Second World War in December of 1941 in an effective alliance with the Soviet Union against Hitlerite fascism, the implications of these political developments created tensions inside the communist movement in the United States. By 1944, under the leadership of Earl Browder, the party was liquidated and turned into the Communist Political Association. This resulted in the shifting of the party's position on the right of self-determination of the African American people. After the war, the factionalism increased inside the organization at the same time that the Cold War developed, resulting in the repression against leftists in the United States. A political struggle against revisionism arose inside the CP, where the repudiation of the national question during the war, as well as other issues, was subjected to rigorous criticism. Now, Claudia Jones, who Andrea had given a report on just earlier, wrote about this in Political Affairs in 1945, and I just want to quote very briefly, and then I want to wrap this up. Jones said in an article in Political Affairs in August of 1945, criticizing the revisionist character of the party under the leadership of Browder, culminating in the line that became dominant during World War II. Jones says that, quote, "It is extremely necessary to examine thoroughly how our revisionist conclusions under the name of Marxist-Leninist science affected our work in all fields, so that we may now draw the correct conclusions with which to address the working class and all oppressed in our country for full victory over reaction and fascism." Jones quotes Browder when he wrote in October of 1943 that, quote, "The crisis of history has taken a turn of such character that the Negro people in the United States have found it possible to make their historic decision once and for all. Their decision is for their complete integration into the American nation as a whole and not for separation," unquote. Browder continued by saying that the decision of the Negro people is therefore already made. It is that the Negro people do see the opportunity not as a pious aspiration for an indefinite future, but as immediate political task under the present system of approximately the position of equal citizens in America. This is in itself an exercise of the right of self-determination by the Negro people. By their attitude, the Negro people have exercised their right to self-determination.